Everyone, CPO here, and in this video, my original intent was just to go get some hits for quarter mile times, 0 to 60, 60-foot times, because I've got new wheels and tires coming, and it turns out it's a little more complicated than that because I'm not exactly sure the best way to get a good launch out of this consistently. So this video is actually morphed into me doing 3 back-to-back-to-back launches with different configurations, and I wanted to see what the results were in the times. So that's what this is, and hope you enjoy. All right, so I went on to Facebook in the GT group and basically asked people, like, what's the best way to get a launch out of this? And surprisingly, I got a lot of different answers. It seemed fairly unanimous that you want to be in the maximum power output mode, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. But then there were some discrepancies on whether or not the suspension should be set to soft setting or firm setting, or whether or not you should use traction control or not traction control. So basically what I did is I went out and I made 3 different hits from the same place and did them back to back. So weather conditions are identical, and yeah, and looked at the differences. So the very first one I did was the one that I was very suspect of, which was to have traction control fully disabled and the suspension in the soft setting, or in this case, it's the normal setting. So basically I'm in a My Drive mode, which has Sport Plus motor, Sport Plus steering, normal suspension, Sport Plus ELSD, and then ESC is completely off. All right, so the outcome of that run is a quarter mile time of 11.58 seconds at 120.09 miles per hour. The 8th mile time is 7.52 seconds at 97.59 miles per hour. And 60-foot time is 1.96 seconds. 0 to 60 is 3.59 seconds. This is kind of what I expected. By the way, state of charge at the start of this run was 87%. And I am documenting the state of charge so that you can see that the charge levels are fairly consistent, although it does decrement by 2 to 3% each run. And we see that later on when we actually look at the data. I think that 2 to 3% actually impacts performance to a very small degree on the top end. So the next thing I did is I went and I re-enabled the ESC and put it into sport mode. So with that, the state of charge at the start of this run was 84%. Quarter mile time was 11.48 seconds at 118.78. 8th mile time was 7.42 at 97.51. 60-foot time is 1.9 seconds, and 0 to 60 is 3.45 seconds. So then the question was, if I stiffen the suspension a little bit, by putting that into Sport Plus mode, what does that gain me? And as you can see here, state of charge at the start of the run was down to 82%. Quarter mile time, 11.47 seconds at 120.18. 8th mile time, 7.41 at 97.43 miles per hour. 60-foot time is 1.89 seconds, and 0 to 60 is 3.5 seconds. So I'm going to look at this data here together here in a second, but I do want to point out, like, if you'll notice during all of these runs, I have maximum power output mode selected, but I'm still in that state of optimizing battery temperature. I'm not fully actually optimized yet on any of these runs. So that's all consistent. And I don't know why. I don't know why after all of this, it's still optimizing battery temperature. It does look like, however, that I'm getting the maximum output of 430 kilowatts in each of the runs. So I think I'm probably there. The car just hasn't like turned into that mode, which you'll see here, ready to drive at maximum power output. That's what it looks like when you're actually like completely in that mode. For some reason, I never got there. And, you know, I don't think it really mattered, to be honest with you, in this run. But we look at the data here, all three runs, I stack them up together. And one thing that I thought was very interesting was clearly in the first two runs, I am having some traction issues. And in particular, that very first run, which you could hear in the video, I'm spinning tires for the first little bit of the run. That is also reflected pretty heavily in the 60-foot time and in the 0 to 60 time. Traction control completely off was not a good option for me in this car, at least not on this surface. But then when I turned traction control back on to sport mode, things improved quite a bit. And then whenever I stiffened up the suspension, it was very similar, but I think improved, but I'm not sure exactly, right? So here's where it gets a little bit weird. So the 60-foot time was pretty comparable, but the 0 to 60 time was actually faster in the normal suspension setting mode than it was in the Sport Plus setting mode. And I think that that probably has to do with whatever happened in the very beginning of that run. There's this little bit of a, I don't know if it's a hiccup or what, but you can see, like maybe I just hit a bump or something weird. But you can see like the car actually shudder for a second. I don't know if that impacted anything, but when you look at the data, that last run, which is basically normal GT mode at this point, was a very linear, straight to maximum output mode. And so what I did here with this graph is I mapped every second of the run and what the kilowatt output was as documented in the video for each second of the run. And so this was a pretty good way to align them because the refresh rate on that display is 1 second. It's basically a 1 hertz refresh. So every second is when it updates. So I'm able to get consistent changes throughout. It's not very scientific, but it does give me some consistency. So you can see the very first run, which is the orange one, it definitely, you can see that tire slip in the very beginning where it took a little bit of while to start building up power. And also you see a little bit of that as well with run 2, but run 3, which is normal GT mode, it is straight to power. That line goes straight up to 430. So I would say, based on what I can see here, that is actually the best mode to be in for a launch. It's just normal GT mode with ESC in Sport Plus mode, suspension in Sport Plus mode, motor obviously in Sport Plus mode. That seems to be the way to go. So you can see it just goes straight up, full power. And then what I see is interesting. They all fall off in a similar fashion. However, the level that is achieved during that period of fall off on the top end of this run is lower the lower the battery charge is. So I did it in the reverse order because I didn't want it to be like, oh, well, this is faster, obviously, because the battery had more charge. So I did it backwards. So the one that I thought was going to be the fastest was actually at the lower state of charge. But you can see at the tail end, I'm generating a little bit less kilowatts, a little bit less power on run 3 than I am on run 2. And run 2 is just a little bit less power than run 1. So I think the difference will be made on the top end based on state of charge. So we get to 430 very quickly, even though it's the lower state of charge with run 3, but then it tapers off a little bit lower than the other runs. So I think that that's where state of charge comes into play, is sustaining that power through the extended run of the quarter mile. So anyway, what I have now are some baseline runs so that when I change wheels and tires this week, I'll be able to go back out and redo this and see. These are all very similar outcomes, but I think the way to go is just GT mode and then like go. So I would have gone and done that GT mode again. I had that little bit of a blip, a hiccup there, you know, at the start of the run. I wanted to go back and redo it, but then I realized I was probably pushing my luck already doing 3 hits in a row in the same place. Yeah, I figured it's probably better to stop there. So I'll pick another date and time to go back out and redo this. But the GT mode is the baseline I'm going to compare against when I do wheels and tire swap. And then I'll try and be at the same sort of similar state of charge. But anyway, if you have any thoughts on this, if you have any of your own testing or data that will be useful in this, please let me know. I thought it was super interesting, and I thought it was really interesting to see the graph, like how these things stacked up. But if you ask me right now, what's the fastest way for a quarter mile run and what's the fastest launch times? I would say just straight GT mode with as much battery charge as you can have at the start of the run. Anybody disagree with that? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.